travel agencies in the city of Dandong were told to halt tours to Pyongyang and other areas of North Korea until further notice, with the exception of one-day tours to Sinŭiju, a city just across the border. The companies say the unexpected ban is devastating news that will lead to a great loss in revenue, as most travel operators offering tours to North Korea are centered in Dandong.
The U.S. President Donald Trump has arrived in Beijing on the latest leg of his five-nation Far East tour. He'll spend 2 nights in the Chinese capital. He's expected to discuss trade and press his counterpart Xi Jinping to cut financial ties to North Korea and abide with UN sanctions. But before talks began in earnest, the pair and their wives were shown round Beijing's Forbidden City, a visit described as an unprecedented honor. The trip to China comes hours after Trump addressed the South Korean parliament, where he issued a now typically fiery warning to Pyongyang over its nuclear weapons program.
Today I hope I speak not only for our countries, but for all civilized nations, when I say to the North, do not underestimate us, and do not try us.
However, his stark language didn't go down well with hundreds of people who protested outside Parliament. They called Trump a thief and accused him of using trade to pressure South Korea into buying arms.
When Richard Nixon became the first US president to visit China 45 years ago, Chairman Mao was in charge. The Cultural Revolution was still on, and the man now China's president was 19 years old and working on a farm. Today, Xi Jinping is the dominant force in Chinese politics. He says he wants China to be center stage in the world. Not since Mao has a US president had to deal with a Chinese leader as powerful as Xi.
Overall, Trump is getting less attention than President Xi Jinping, and he doesn't like that, because Xi is he's leading the discussion of climate change, and he's participated actively in the free trade discussion. So, but for Trump, he doesn't have anything like that. So it's less comfortable for him.
Do you think he envies Xi Jinping?
Definitely, he definitely does.
It'll be tensions over North Korea and Chinese trade practices that'll be the dominant themes. But China's still expected to confirm several trade deals for which Trump will be able to claim credit, says one analyst.
Xi will play him like a fiddle. He will be very polite, he will be very obsequious, and he will basically push Trump around, make him pay attention to what he thinks he needs to pay attention to, and everything will be smiles and handshakes, and Trump will go away getting nothing from the visit.
With the exception of Gerald Ford, every visiting US president has gone to the Great Wall, but it's not on Trump's itinerary. Given his love of walls, it could have provided a
Chinese Vice Premier Wang Yang and U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross oversaw the signing ceremony in Beijing. The deals include a pledge by Chinese e-commerce company JD.com to buy over $2 billion worth of food products from the U.S., and a pact for Rainwood International to purchase additional aircraft from U.S. firm Bell Helicopter. Wang said the agreements were merely a warm-up before President Xi and Trump oversee bigger deals on Thursday, including ones involving the export of natural gas and soybeans.
I would say China 5,000 years it goes back. Seems to be 5,000. Right? 5,000 at least. And I guess the oldest culture they say is Egypt at 8,000.
埃及更古老一些，但是呢，文化没有断过流的，始终传承下来的只有中国。
So this is your original form very much, yeah, it really is. 这就是原来的文化。
对，就我们这些人也是原来的人，黑头发、黄皮肤，传承下来的，我们叫龙的传人。
Red hair, yellow skin. We call ourselves the inheritance people going down from dragon. The sons and daughters of dragon.
The single-seater Mirage 2000 fighter jet fell off the radar at 6:43 p.m. while it was conducting a regular nighttime training exercise. Authorities dispatched 17 military planes as well as 10 naval and coast guard vessels to conduct a search, but so far there have been no sightings of the missing plane. Air Force Deputy Chief Chang Che-ping said an investigation into the cause of the incident was still underway. Taiwan has meanwhile grounded all its Mirage jets pending the investigation.
Warm welcome for the President and First Lady here, and you could really sense the charm offensive from the Chinese, from the welcoming ceremony over at the airport during the afternoon to this evening's festivities in the Forbidden City, which is truly one of the absolute marvels on this planet. I've had a chance to go there, and the President and First Lady were there tonight. An historic evening for them. But while you're going to hear a great deal about the beauty and pageantry of the welcome, there is business to get to here. There is clearly a gulf, Sandra, between the philosophies of the two leaders as it relates to trade in North Korea that have to be bridged at some point. Now, on trade, as you know, the President wants concessions from China, including fewer barriers to get into the Chinese marketplace for American companies and less Chinese companies dumping their goods into the U.S. sector. By the way, we've been told to expect some deliverables on trade during this trip. Should make for a very interesting Thursday. Now, on North Korea, the President wants President Xi Jinping to apply the proverbial hammer on Pyongyang, cutting off their economic support and abiding by UN sanctions. That is, by the way, a theme carried with him from South Korea, where he addressed their National Assembly.
I also have come here to this peninsula to deliver a message directly to the leader of the North Korean dictatorship. The weapons you are acquiring are not making you safer. They are putting your regime in grave danger. Every step you take down this dark path increases the peril you face. North Korea is not the paradise your grandfather envisioned. It is a hell that no person deserves.
Strong words from the President of the United States. Now, I should also point this out. While in South Korea, the President actually attempted to go to the DMZ. Perhaps more history could have been made there. However, bad weather and fog scrubbing that surprise trip. Now, there is a lot yet to come for the President during his time here. In fact, tonight around 8 o'clock this evening, we expect a pretty dramatic opening ceremony, another welcome for him, 8 p.m. your time, not our time. And then, of course, all the meetings at hand should make for a very eventful trip. Country number 3.
Way to deny that the administration has changed the mindset of the key player in all of this, which is China. There's no way to resolve this in a non-military scenario without China being on board. And finally, after all these years of enabling, along with Russia and Iran, of enabling North Korea, of finally adhering to very tough and aggressive sanctions. China, somewhere in the president's office, I guarantee in China, in Beijing, is a file marked succession plan for North Korea. They have thought this through because they think everything through in the long term. So if they believe that the only other option, potentially, is a military conflict because the North Koreans are entirely bent on finally getting what they've wanted all these years, the nuclear and ballistic missile technology. If they actually believe that, then they could orchestrate a regime change. They could orchestrate this in a manner that avoids this military conflict that nobody wants, but you still have to plan for.
They want that, but do they want the U.S. to be leading that? Do they want the U.S. to be putting the rules in place?
Well, no. When people say, well, we'll have to give something to North Korea to make this happen, to have some sort of, stabilization and denuclearization, it's not what we have to give North Korea, it's what we have to give China. So, yes, you're right. This has to be acceptable. That solution has to be acceptable to China. But at the same time, look, we've spent 2.5 decades. We're not where we are now because of the past 8 months of a Trump administration. We're here because for 25 years or so, we've had feckless sanctions, and the Chinese, again, and the Russians and the Iranians in particular, have been enabling the North Koreans. If we can stop that and finally get the Chinese to aggressively adhere to these sanctions, then we've got a chance.
A lot of people feel sanctions don't work. What do you think?
No, I don't think they affect the leader in North Korea. I mean, do you think he cares about his people? There's no evidence he cares about his people.
But he cares about staying in power.
He does. He does.
If he sees that, and with relative ease, and I'm speaking relatively here, the Chinese could completely tie that noose on him financially and particularly through energy. And he could then see that there's only one way for him to survive.
But Xi doesn't have to do that. He's cemented his power with the recent Congress in China, and he's in the most powerful position of any leader in literally decades in China. So he comes into this meeting with President Trump. President Trump has a record stock market, but Xi has the power of the Communist Congress behind him, and he's on equal footing, at least I would argue, in his mind with President Trump. That he's working from a position of power and authority.
It's easier to be a dictator. I mean, then you just do whatever you want. But look, I think President Trump has taken the right position. I believe in peace through strength. He's taken a tough stance. We have 3 carrier groups out there. We have the THAAD missile system. Russia doesn't like that. China doesn't like that. And the president is using that card in order to leverage trade and other things to get what he
talking about that.
Relationship is a mutual benefit. It's a trade across the Pacific to benefit people in the U.S. and in China. Although there's a trade deficit in the commodities, the service trade has been a surplus for the United States because so many Chinese students have come to the U.S. to consume, to study, and legal service and other services industries have benefited tremendously from this relationship. And also, as you showed earlier, the investments from China has also produced many jobs for U.S. cities, especially those small, remote areas. China's investments have benefited so much of the U.S. economy. In fact, there are some barriers for the Chinese investments come to the United States. So the negotiation has been not only the deficit side, but also how to overcome the barriers on the both sides, both China side and the U.S. side. In fact, the U.S. also set some limitations on the exports to China of the technology, high-tech industries. So many issues in the relationship is much more complicated than those simple deficit issue, as you mentioned that during the campaign trail, candidate Trump mentioned.
Yeah.
When he comes to the White House, he is facing the reality now. That's why I see his trip to China is very important for him to understand the complication of the issue and also to find ways to promote the trade relationships both ways.
Yeah, he's an unpredictable president, though. I mean, we saw an example of that in the Republic of Korea. He extends an olive branch saying to North Korea, let's make a deal. But later, Trump tries to make a surprise visit to the DMZ, but was forced to return because of heavy fog. That's something that the president of the Republic of Korea did not want to have happen and could have inflamed the situation. So you never really know what you're going to get from him moment to moment. So if you're China, how do you prepare for a Trump visit?
You just try to help him to understand the China situation. In fact, in my view, as far as he lands on the Chinese soil, he will see the importance of China to the United States and how China has also treasured the relationship. That's very important. And also for him to meet with the Chinese leaders at a very high level to show, to learn how the Chinese leadership tries to work out the relationship. That itself, I think it will be very important for him. As you said, he's unpredictable. The only predictability to him is unpredictable. In that case, for the Chinese side, they should just be consistent. Try to work with him, try to find ways to resolve those conflicts, to find solutions to the trade deficit, North Korean issues. He tries to, in his priority list of this trip. In the meantime, I think China has so many other issues to cooperate with the United States, for example, on the crime prevention, on the deportation of the criminals from the United States, and also cybersecurity, and climate change. Many other issues should be also on the agenda on the China side, in addition to South China Sea and also Taiwan issue. So there are many issues leaders could talk about, and in spite of his unpredictability, those issues are important for both countries. So he has to face those issues, although he might change his mind when he is on the spot. But that's okay, that's him. We have to deal with the reality of his unpredictability.
Yes,
Of his personality.
Sam, we've run out of time, but some great observations. Thanks for your analysis. Sam Zhao joining us from...
You said he's on message so far, and with North Korea, he's really looking to calibrate the tone here, because on the one hand, he wants to show that he's serious, but he's walking into his meetings with the Chinese president, and he wants to show the Chinese that he is willing to negotiate, because that's what China's ask is can't all be about threats from the Chinese perspective. But in China, look, really, President Trump has two big asks, North Korea and trade, and both of those are big. So it's going to be a tall order in terms of actually getting some real results from the Chinese.
But what does China want? If we looked at their list of priorities, what do they want?
Well, China's very happy with the status quo. Xi Jinping feels like he's on a great track. He just came out of a domestic political event where he got even more power. China feels like their influence is growing day by day. What they don't want is the U.S. to follow through with some of the tough measures on trade, on North Korea sanctions that the U.S. administration has been threatening. So President Xi is fine to just get through this with no gaffes. He looks great for his domestic media. He's playing to a Chinese audience that has state-run media that's going to show him as a skillful master of diplomacy, sitting down with President Trump as a true peer, as a global leader. He gets through this. They're not looking for any big asks here.
That's not going to be enough.
No, despite our mutually beneficial economic and trade relationship with China and Xi really want us ultimately out of Northeast Asia, do they not?
China would certainly like to be the unquestioned power in Asia. I don't think they want the U.S. to move too abruptly, right? A vacuum doesn't mean, it's not like the U.S. pulls out, China just steps right in. What happens is the U.S. pulls out, Australia, India, Japan step forward. That's not necessarily good for China as well. So China would like to do this gradually, and I think they'd be very happy if...
Well, that's why they tolerate the threats from North Korea. Correct. That's why that they kind of stand back and let North Korea threaten us and other players in the region.
Well, what China's afraid of is a collapse of the North Korean regime right on their doorstep, right? I mean, this is right on China's border. You think about how the U.S. views its security relationship with Mexico, for example, and the security threats that entails. For China, you've got a potentially unstable regime with nuclear weapons. China's afraid of a refugee crisis where you've got North Koreans pouring over China's borders. They're worried about Kim Jong-un taking rash actions. It's not just about the U.S. relationship. They're worried about something really going down very badly right on their doorstep.
What are the chances that China actually sticks with the sanctions, particularly the financial sanctions?
Well, I think the U.S. ultimately is going to be disappointed, and it really gets back to this dynamic. It's China's willing to increase incrementally the pressure on the North Korean regime, but they don't want to take the steps that the U.S. wants. What the U.S. wants is maximize economic leverage, cut off China's oil exports to North Korea, really threaten this regime with everything they've got so that they come to the negotiating table. China's willing to go some of the way, but not to the extent that it could threaten a collapse of the North Korean regime, because that's where you get back into a refugee crisis and some of these other deep concerns that China has.
What kind of deal flow are you expecting? When the president came back from his Mideast trip, he talked about hundreds of billions of dollars in deals. U.S. and Chinese firms have reportedly signed 20 deals worth $9 billion today alone. It's not clear which companies are involved in these deals, but this morning Ford announced a $750 million joint venture with a Chinese auto firm to develop electric vehicles in China. Are we slowly but surely seeing China open up its market to the U.S. or not?
No, I think this is really a short-term fix, and a lot of this is about optics, because the trade deals will look good, but what the President Trump really wants is deeper measures by China to open its markets. And strangely enough, that's not really on the agenda for this visit. He's going to deliver the message, But the U.S. administration has not been pushing for China to make those commitments on this trip. Sort of trade deals now, and we're going to talk about the tough stuff down the road. The problem is when you don't have an action-forcing event like these presidential visits, it's hard to get that leverage with China. It doesn't come every day. So this might be a missed opportunity from that perspective.
We've been so focused on North Korea and the imminent danger there. What about the South China Sea? Vietnam is obviously in a precarious position, proximity to China, a trading partner with the United States. How do you view the discussions regarding Vietnam and the South China Sea?
Well, that'll definitely be part of the message that President Trump delivers to the Chinese is, look, we need to see at least a freeze in terms of China's further construction of defense installations.
But they're not going to do that, are they? I mean, they've been on a tear developing and growing and taking over these islands and making artificial islands and calling them their own.
That's right. It might slow in pace, but they're not going to stop. But I think South China Sea, we're not in a position like North Korea. President Trump has decided North Korea is the most serious global threat the U.S. faces. He is focused on that and on trade. South China Sea is part of this picture, but the temperature on that issue is much cooler than it was, say, a year ago. So it'll be part of that discussion, not a central focus.
So in your opinion, what counts as a win for President Trump, for this administration, from this trip?
I think he'll want to see assurances from Xi that China's willing to do more on North Korea and a commitment by China to open its markets further.
Well, why wouldn't China do more to rein in North Korea? I mean, I understand that they don't want this refugee, they don't want a refugee crisis, but knowing the potential damage and a horrible situation that North Korea can create, why wouldn't China do more?
Well, they are doing a bit more. In fact, they've gone further than I think a lot of people were expecting, and it really is because of the pressure that the U.S. is putting on them. The problem is we're moving closer to those red lines. The U.S. wants to take that further step, and that's where China, that's where China's red line is. Collapse of the North Korean regime, very difficult situation for them. Look, this is a terrible situation for Beijing, too. They are very alarmed at the North Korean regime. It's not what they want to see. The problem is that what they their worst option is one that leads to the collapse of the regime. So they're also navigating a very difficult balance here.
We were talking about sanctions, Jason. You said, look, North Korea doesn't care about the sanctions. They don't care about its people. I mean, the Senate Banking Committee unanimously approved a bill that requires the Treasury to sanction banks that knowingly handle transactions with North Korea. The legislation does not name China directly, but Chinese banks manage most of Pyongyang's international accounts.
It's so funny to me. We say, oh, we're going to do sanctions, and then every time something gets hot again, we say, oh, well, we're going to ratchet it up. I don't know why we didn't just go to the maximum, but I also don't think they have any effect, because I don't think the leader there cares about his people.
I think that's right. I think that's why there's real concern in the U.S. policy community that even this maximum pressure campaign that the U.S. is launching may not work. It's kind of a race right now between U.S. imposing sanctions and increasing that leverage and North Korea's missile program. And given, as you said, given how important this is to North Korea's leader, he views this as his guarantee of his survival. It looks like missiles might win ultimately.
But do you think Kim Jong-un's suicidal?
I don't think he's suicidal, but I think he views this ability to get this deterrent of a nuclear-enabled ICBM that could reach the U.S. as the card that he needs to secure his survival. Exactly.